Support for this podcast comes from Imon Communications in Cedar Rapids, a local choice for high-speed internet with speeds up to 1 gig, now expanding fiber-to-the-home services to Iowa City, Coralville, and Dubuque. Learn more about the Imon difference at imon.net/IPR.
It's Talk of Iowa from IPR News. I'm Charity Nebbe. Later this hour, the Southeast Iowa Symphony Orchestra is bringing classical music to students in rural Iowa. We'll find all about KidSypmphony later this hour. But first, Debra Marquart has been writing poetry, songs, and essays for decades, inspiring her readers, her listeners, and her students. She is a distinguished professor of liberal arts and sciences and teaches in the MFA program in creative writing and the environment at Iowa State University. She's also the Iowa Poet Laureate, amongst other things. And she has just published a new book that features her new poetry, but also 30 years of collected works. It's called Gratitude with Dogs Under Stars, and Debra Marquart is with me now. Hello.
Hi, Charity. It's so great to be here. 30 years, that sounds so daunting.
It does, but it's also pretty magical. When you look through the collection, when you get toward the back, we're reading poetry from the mid-90s.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, and I started out as a musician, so those were my early one of my graduate students calls them wranglings, my early wranglings with poetry, because I was really a musician interested in song lyrics first, and then brought all that I knew about lyrics over to writing poetry.
What was it about poetry that captured you? Because you were already writing song lyrics, which is very similar to poetry, but what drew you in that direction?
I think, I've spoken about this before, but I lost everything in a fire in 1980. I was in a touring rock band and not really writing at all, not living a very contemplative life at all, just, moving forward, playing every night on the road. And then when the fire happened, that stalled my life out, and I ended up sort of stranded in a efficiency apartment in North Fargo with really nothing to do, no money. And so writing and language stepped in at that moment and kind of filled the gap. And, many writers and artists will talk about having a sort of predilection of loss that started or either started or kind of continued to fuel and inspire their creative process. So I think we make things toward that which we have lost and that we miss and that we're far away from. And the writing will fill the gap, will make the connection.
With poetry, there is not always as big and ready an audience for poetry as there is with other kinds of writing. And so I wonder, when you write poetry, if you think about your readers, or is this something just for you?
Oh, I always think about potential readers, and I think about the way the work will enter the world, because I really believe that words have language. The origins of poetry are probably songs, prayers, chants, curses, things like that, things that were intended to go into the world and make a difference. And I just really believe the acoustic value of each word. It goes into the world, and it continues to move through the world, even though its acoustic sound has decayed and we don't hear it anymore. It is part of the audible world after that. And so I just feel like I'm part of a chorus, like a large chorus, and we're all singing, together our various parts.
When you put this collection together, those poems from the 90s, had you read them recently?
No, I really hadn't, because you publish a book and then you sort of go on tour and read from it, and then the next book comes out and you sort of pay attention to that one and tend to read, I think, like most poets, I tend to read my most recent poems that I've written. Some of it is trying it out on audiences and seeing how it goes, and some of that, also influences the shaping of the poem. After one has read it aloud to an audience, you can sort of see what worked and what didn't. So you sort of leave your oeuvre behind, your body of work. So it was really something to sit in when I proofed the galleys for the book, to sort of read all the way back to my first poetic work.
What did you learn from that?
Well, it was really a strange experience because I was in Ireland at the time, and I take students to Ireland on a study abroad course, a traveling writer's workshop. So we go to Ireland for 3.5 weeks, and we travel all over Ireland and go to events. And the Irish are known for their reverence for poetry. They really do believe that poetry is important, unlike, as you so kindly put it earlier, American audiences are less interested in poetry. People who love poetry in this country love it fiercely, but it's not necessarily a force in this country. But in Ireland, people will stand up in the middle of a bar and recite a poem, and everyone will sit and listen to it, So to be traveling in Ireland and then proofing my work, I think what I took away from it was just, it gave me additional confidence in the work, that it was important, that it had value, and that, I had been working towards something all of these years, refining my skill, learning how to do new things, trying to engage the questions that were sort of coming to me, either through the culture, through the news, through my own experience with family. So just really trying to kind of curate experiences and then boil them down and, turn them into something really, really condensed that you could then offer to a reader. I always talk about poetry as a kind of nutrition.
Nutrition, what does that mean?
Well, it's, there's a great quote from William Carlos Williams. It's difficult to get the news from poems, yet men die miserably every day from lack of what is found there. And I think the lack of what is found there that people don't get in their everyday lives is this sort of condensing of meaning, and a poet really looking at things and meditating on it and contemplating, and then finding a small arrangement of words that can encapsulate a huge complexity in just, one page, in just 2 minutes of hearing a poem. And that's not something that we really get in our everyday lives, where there's just so much noise and clutter in our audible world, not, the news, the sound on the street, the sound in our buildings where we work, the lights, the exchange, air exchange systems. There's a lot of noise in our lives. So poetry is intended to quiet everything around you for that very small moment, and then bring some small, edible piece of nutrition.
Yeah. Well, and sometimes there's just the resonance in a poem that really speaks to you. I feel like it would magnify that silence in such a beautiful way.
That's right. Yeah, there's and we, poets work for those moments, and some of a poem is a kind of a staging area for maybe 1 or 2 lines in a poem that hopefully will deliver something really powerful and meaningful and moving for a reader. And, sometimes these are called, so you can compare them to like the high note in the aria that an opera singer sings. The whole song sort of works toward that moment.
Would you read a poem for us? Would you read the title poem from the newest collection, The Gratitude with the Dogs Under Stars?
Yeah, well, I would. I'd love to. Thank you so much. And, a lot of these poems in the sort of quote-unquote new part of the book, which is about 21 new poems, they were written when I lived along a creek in the southwestern part of Ames, and this creek was a throughway for all kinds of critters, and so it was an entertaining place. And my dogs are a big part of my life during this period of my life. So this is basically, one night when they had to go to the bathroom in the middle of the night, and begrudgingly I took them out and then had this experience. Gratitude with Dogs Under Stars. Bless this night. Bless the small bladders of dogs, urgent under moonlight. Bless Raccoon and her brothers, those masked 3 a.m. bandits who lowered themselves on branches of viburnum with eerie 5-fingered hands into the dumpster, who scavenged melon rinds, burger wrappers, tossed oily tuna cans to pavement with a chime that pricked the ears of my sleeping Lhasa Apsos. Those litter mates, bred to guard monasteries, who have warned me awake, bless their low ruff and whine, and bless the scramble for boots, coats, leashes, propelled into this obsidian night under indigo skies, crisp exhale puffed into clouds. Above us, velvety stillness, Sirius, a twinkling beacon in a stippled southern sky. Castor and Pollux, those star twins, throwing their geminid tracers. Scattershot pinpricks of radiance into darkness. Above us, this after-image of ancient supernovas, billions of years old, violent light moving toward us. Let us witness their brilliance going. From this blessed place on earth, we fortunate mortals on the ground, living amongst terrestrials, who sniff and paw the dirt, who kick back their legs and growl at the darkness, while above us, so much deadly light to wish upon.
That is Gratitude with Dogs Under Stars by Debra Marquart, also the title of her latest book. And Deb, I hope you can acknowledge how much, I guess, just patience or self-control I'm exercising here to not do the whole interview about all of the wonderful things that our dog companions give us. But it's such a beautiful poem about a moment where you were fully present, and then you take us with you and make us fully present in that moment. It is really, really beautiful. So thank you so much for that.
Oh, thank you so much, Charity. Well, it is a moment of, I'm sort of grumbling and angry about being woken up in the middle of the night, and then sort of the cosmos open to me.
We're going to take a short break. We'll be back in just a moment. I'm talking with Debra Marquart. Her new book is Gratitude with Dogs Under Stars, New and Collected Poems, and we'll hear a little more poetry in a moment. Debra Marquart is also a distinguished professor of liberal arts and sciences at Iowa State University and our state poet laureate. More in a moment. This is Talk of Iowa from IPR News.
Support for this podcast comes from Imon Communications, headquartered in Cedar Rapids, a local choice for high-speed internet, no buffering or lost connection. Now expanding fiber-to-the-home services to Iowa City, Coralville, and Dubuque. Learn more at imon.net/IPR.
Did you know you are physically adapting to all your swiping, scrolling, and tapping?
We're changing our bodies and what they're able to do through our habits.
NPR's Body Electric, a special interactive series investigating how to fix the relationship between our tech and our health. Listen in the TED Radio Hour feed wherever you get your podcasts.
It's Talk of Iowa from IPR News. I'm Charity Nebbe. Coming up in just about 15 minutes, we will find out about KidSypmphony. It is the Southeast Iowa Symphony Orchestra's outreach program for students in rural Iowa. They've got a lot of concerts in rural Iowa coming up on Saturday and Sunday. We'll find out more. With me right now is Debra Marquart. She is a distinguished professor of liberal arts and sciences and teaches in the MFA program in creative writing and the environment at Iowa State University. She is the Iowa Poet Laureate, and she's just published a new book that features some new poetry and also 30 years of collected works. It's called Gratitude with Dogs Under Stars. And Deb, before we get too far along, I would love for you to read another poem, because that title poem is so beautiful, but that's not entirely emblematic of the kind of poetry that you write. You have a lot of different kinds of poems, and I would love for you to read one called Pre-Existing Conditions, which has a very different tone.
Yes, I wrote this poem in kind of an important political moment when the debate about the Affordable Health Care Act was moving through the Congress, and my sister died quite suddenly at the age of 58 around this time. And so these two things came together, and it has an epigraph pre-existing conditions. The poem has an epigraph from Sister Simone Campbell, who addressed the Assembly of the Democratic National Convention in 2012. And she said, I am my sister's keeper. 3 weeks ago, my sister went on her lunch break and turned right for home rather than left for the clinic, where she might have been forced to admit to the doctor that the pain in her left arm was something more than the chronic ache in her left shoulder from the ladder fall while cleaning last year. Instead, she went home for soup, which is where my brother found her the next morning, seated at the kitchen counter with her head resting in her arms, as if she'd only fallen asleep after her boss reported she hadn't come to work. She rose each day at 5 a.m. to bake muffins and fresh bread, to make the potato salad and rotisserie chickens that stock the coolers and shelves for the convenience of people who don't have time to cook. Too young for Medicare, at 58, she earned an hourly wage that held her just above the poverty line, just enough to disqualify her for Medicaid. I see now how she fell between the cracks. Sure, she tempted fate, cooked with too many eggs, too much salt, sugar, butter, and cream. Food was the love she offered the world, and didn't we gobble up every rich thing she put before us? Did she calculate the cost of the coverage offered her under the new Health Care Act and think, $400 a month, that's a car payment. That's 40 hours of labor, a full week of wages. How I wish she'd been forced to buy it. On that last morning, did she turn right for home instead of left for the clinic? Because she knew a trip to the doctor would mean a quadruple bypass, loss of a job, bankruptcy, the forced foreclosure of a house almost paid for, $700 left on the mortgage at the time of her death. So did she decide to take the pain and risk it, believing she was too tough to die? Well, she wasn't. To be human is to walk around with pre-existing conditions, always some muscle or valve poised to fail, some cell ready to grow wild. Never before have I wanted to speak to my president and say, please, hurry up with this. She was my sister. Do you understand? As children, we shared a bathtub. In those years of once-a-week Saturday night washings, I can still feel her soapy back against mine. As teenagers, we shared a bedroom, whispering late into the darkness between our twin beds, until one of us would grow tired and say, Little Red Schoolhouse on the Hill, which was our private code for shut up now so that I can get some sleep.
That's the poem Pre-Existing Conditions by Debra Marquart. Deb, I can tell you what that poem means to me, but I am curious. Obviously, this was an incredible loss, and I'm so sorry. Mm-hmm. What does it mean to you to be able to put those emotions, the anger, the grief, into a poem?
Well, you know, it's a kind of purgative in a way. I think whenever we lose a family member or someone close to us, there's so much room for regret and, you know, I wish I had done this, I should have known this, and I should have said this, and, you know, all of these misgivings. And one for me when my sister died was that I realized after the fact that she didn't have health insurance. And that was shocking to me, you know, that she had worked so hard, raised 5 children on her own, had always worked at least 2 jobs in my small hometown, and yet didn't have health insurance, you know. And so the poem, I think some of these things, they fly in from different directions. And like I said, this sort of debate about the Health Care Act was going on, and then my sister's death, and then this realization after the fact. And they all kind of come together to make the, you know, the impetus for a poem. And so it is, you know, it is a gratifying feeling, and hopefully it resonates. You know, the hope is that by telling your own story truly and deeply and honestly, that it will, you know, maybe make somebody do something differently, or it'll help someone who's going through something not necessarily the same but similar, help them feel it and understand it, and hopefully it resonates with people.
You have been the Iowa Poet Laureate. Is it 4 years now?
2019. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, of course, you became Iowa Poet Laureate right before the pandemic shut down every event ever and canceled a lot of the plans that you have had. But so tell me, looking back on the last 4 years, what do you feel you've been able to do as Iowa's Poet Laureate?
Oh, I don't know if I've been able to do anything, too dramatic, but what I've really tried to do was go into all the corners of the state. When invited and when not invited, I might be really rude and contact someone and say, do you want me to come to your library? Do you want me to come to your school? And people have been really generous and opened up their facilities. And I have to say, teachers have so much trouble fitting a guest lecturer into their classrooms. That's been the hardest piece, is just finding time to work my way into a class, which I always thought was very important, because I always imagine what it'd be like if I'd had a live poet come into my class, growing up in my small hometown. So I'm trying to take poems and literary art to parts of the state that maybe don't have as much of it. Some of the bigger cities and the college towns, we have a lot of this, but that's what I've tried to do, and support other poets around the state, and just lift up the art form.
For a woman who already has at least 3, maybe more, 4, 5 jobs, what has that been like? I mean, that sounds incredibly meaningful, but also time consuming.
Yeah, it has been. Sometimes I just throw my dogs in the car and they ride along with me, and then we ride home after the event. But I think, the real gift of it is just making contact with so many people around the state, and this state is just full of brilliant, creative, enthusiastic people, who are doing amazing things in their hometown to try to create culture and arts. I just spent the weekend in Perry, Iowa, this wonderful town, with the Art on the Prairie conference. And this is the way that you find like-minded people, by going to these events. And often I'll do an event at a library and people walk in and say, oh, I didn't know you were interested in poetry, And so people within communities are finding each other and hopefully creating writing groups so they can continue to support their creativity.
Right now, the nomination process for the next Poet Laureate of Iowa is going on. Are you engaged in that process?
Yes, I'm part of it, and we're really looking forward to passing the baton. We originally hoped that the laureate position would move more quickly from one laureate to another, so more people could, take it on and we'd have greater representation. And so it's exciting to see a new pool of poets who are part of that, have been nominated into the pool. And so we're in the middle of the process right now of reviewing the materials. And then I'm sure you probably know how it works, Charity, but, this committee basically whittles it down to 3 people. And then those 3 nominees go to the governor, and then the governor makes the final decision.
It seemed very natural to me when you were named Iowa Poet Laureate, Deb, so I didn't question it at all. But do you know how you were chosen? Why you were selected?
Well, I think I've just hung around so long.
I don't think that's
and keep writing books. Yeah, but the thing is, I really am a North Dakota poet. I really write mostly about North Dakota, and I was excited that more recently in my last book, I have written some Iowa poems, and then in my last book of prose, The Night We Landed on the Moon, I've got some Iowa essays. So I feel like I earned my, I got my street cred in Iowa. But I think I was on the list, before. It's a pretty, I think they try to pull in a lot of names. And so it's likely that people on the list have been on the list before, and they sort of move through the process, and hopefully we're looking for someone who's inspiring and wants to go out and really engage with the community and kind of keep the oil, the light fire of poetry burning.
So if people are listening right now, they can actually nominate people for Iowa Poet Laureate, right?
I think the formal nomination
I just clicked on the page. You're right. It has passed.
November 1st. Yeah. Jenny Kniebly from Iowa Arts Council and Heather Plukar from Humanities Iowa, because the laureate sort of rests on those two institutions. And so they would be able to, one of them would be able to answer if it's still possible to put a name in. But, hopefully we get a good, vibrant pool of people to consider.
Now, as I said, you already have 3 or 4 or 5 jobs, so it feels unfair to ask you this question. But what is next? I know you've got a couple of really big projects that you're working on.
Yeah, I feel like my most important work is kind of in front of me. And, every time you write a piece, you learn something. And then the next piece that you write, you can use those techniques and you develop sort of a range of skills. So I'm working on this book called Leave It in the Ground, which is about the oil boom in my home state of North Dakota. But it's also about oil extraction and dependency on fossil fuels in general. And it's taking a lot of time and research I realize to say leave it in the ground is on the surface, a very naive statement, because the very idea of economy, was created around oil. Oil is the currency that drives our economies. So I've done a lot of research to try to justify saying leave it in the ground and saying sort of why it's necessary in our time and important. And so that's one book I'm working on.
And
then
that's
the other one
going to be a book-length lyric poem.
It is, yeah. It's a tradition called docupoetry, so it does have documentary elements in it, including, say, for example, scientific reports, collage from possibly court transcripts, government policy, scientific reports, along with personal, narratives. So it's a kind of a pastiche, but it has a documentary quality, and it's a book-length poem. Yeah.
Have you done something like that before, a docu-poem?
Well, I'm teaching a lot of them, and selfishly, whenever I'm interested in writing about something, then I teach it first, and then I've got all these cool, brilliant graduate students to talk with it about. So I learn by doing that. But I would say that I have a long poem in Small Buried Things, which is my last collection. I wrote a long poem and 5-sequence poem about the oil boom. It's called Ground Zero. And so, Small Buried Things is sort of the working title of that long poem. And so that poem had documentary elements in it.
You're also working on another project called How Fish Learn to Sing. Tell me briefly about that.
Yeah. That one's more fun. And I actually go back and forth between the two projects. I sort of, when I feel like an oil-slicked, pelican from the Leave It in the Ground, I'll go over to the music book. And that book is, the skeleton of the book that runs through it is the story of my band and losing everything in the fire and, having this correction in my path in life toward writing. And so that's a big part of the book. But I'm also writing about, the art of listening and performance as a public spectacle. What we get from going to see, like Taylor Swift, for example, in a huge